Hello, hi, what's up? Welcome back. It's me, Kiran, your favorite booktuber, coming at you from the floor because I wanted to sit here. And today we're going to be talking about my October wrap up. I read I think I read a decent amount of books. I read 13 books, and the reason I was able to get through so many of them was because I was doing a lot of driving, so I was listening to a lot of audiobooks. But without further ado, let's just dive right into it. One of the first books that I read was Seduction and Betrayal by Elizabeth Hardwick. These are short stories. No, they're not short stories. These are essays that Elizabeth Hardwick wrote about women in literature, and I would say, so it's like criticism kind of, but they're really, really good. These are so good. Just the lens through which she's looking at everything, women in literature, was just so fascinating. So the first essay is about the Bronte sisters, and she's talking about their personal lives and how that affected their writing. And I really like things like that. And then she also has like a whole section about Ibsen. Ibsen is was a playwright who wrote some really fabulous plays. Now let me just say that I had read about Ibsen in Harold Bloom's collection of essays about literature and criticism and whatever, and that man made me so tired of Ibsen. I was like, ew. But like, she wrote about him, and she's writing about the different female characters he wrote and how, this one had so much, personality, really well-rounded. This one isn't, but shows us this. Like, I was like, I need to get some plays by Ibsen. And then I went to the bookstore, and then I looked at the plays, and the font was really small. So that's on pause right now while I figure that out. But I don't know, if that little diatribe didn't convince you to read these, you definitely should. There's also in the beginning, an introduction by Joan Didion, who's talking about these essays and some of the other topics, if you would. There's an essay on Sylvia Plath. There's one on Zelda Fitzgerald, like Jane Carlyle, who I think I read about in Parallel Lives, because one of the marriages she looks at is Jane Carlyle and her marriage with her husband. And it's just really fascinating. I would say this is a really good collection. It was so good. I actually bought bigger collection of essays by Jane Hardwick, and which is also like an NYRB version. I'm doing lots of talking, so I'll like hurry it up a little bit. The one last thing I wanted to say, the only essay that I had an issue with in this is the one on Bloomsbury and Virginia Woolf. I think I need to reread that one because half of it went over my head. But this was very good. Would recommend. Then on audio, I did The Baby on the Fire Escape by Julie Phillips. Now this book I have seen in basically every major art gallery and museum, and ignored it for like what feels like forever, but it literally has only been on the shelves for like a year. And this one is a book that's exploring women artists and their relationship to motherhood, and it's kind of a good continuation of my reading that I've been doing on marriage, because obviously for some people a big part of marriage is child rearing, and though not all of the women who are featured in her nonfiction book were married, it's still really interesting to see how these women grapple with the demands of motherhood, but also art making, whether that's painting or writing. So one of the people she does talk about is Alice Neel, who was quite a prominent American painter who was really interested on painting people who were often ignored. And she got married fairly young, I would say in her 20s, and moved to Cuba, had her first child, and then decides to leave that marriage. And she moves back to New York, and kind of because of that fissure, that loss with her daughter, she has a really bad relationship with her eldest child. But then later in life, she has 2 more children, 2 sons. And just like seeing the differences between who she was as a mother then versus a mother when she decides to have children at a later date, it's very interesting. And I think having children, being romantically involved with people, and also being an artist are all things that demand so much on the individual, and how an individual grapples with it, how they try or attempt to do it all is very interesting, and you see how tough it is. And so the book is called The Baby on the Fire Escape because Alice Neel's in-laws basically were like, Alice Neel put the baby on the fire escape in order to finish her paintings, but that never happened. So it's just kind of looking at the different challenges that women experience once they decide to become mothers, and I found it to be really fascinating. I probably I'm not selling you on it, but I would definitely recommend if motherhood, art making are of interest to you. Then right now I'm also on another kick. The kick is McNally Editions, and the first one that I read was A Green Equinox by Elizabeth Mavor. I don't know if this is focusing. So this was shortlisted, I think, for one of the Booker prizes. This book came out in the 70s, and this is a very trippy little book because the writing style is very ornate. It took me a minute to get into it. This tells a story of our main character, Hero, who is having an affair, and then she ends up kind of falling in love with her lover's wife, and then gets involved with the mother. So there's a lot happening. This isn't like a menage a trois. There's 4 people here. There's a lot to break down. And we're looking at this like idyllic little English village, upper middle class. It's like, if you like Brideshead Revisited, you'll probably like this because it's looking at rich British people just, you know, being careless. And I would say it's just very unusual, the novel. It's not exactly, it's very different from contemporary literature that's currently on the market. It's not exactly an easy read because the language is, you know, kind of out there. She uses words I've never even heard of. The sentences are dense, but it does kind of add to the charm of the book. After that, I read Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is a fantasy book where the author was kind of inspired a little bit by The Princess and the Pea and something else, but it's really good. It is very, very good. This tells a story of this young woman, she's like 30, who at a very early age was sent to be a nun and is knitting and sewing and just that's her life, but she's very insecure. And then she realizes that she needs to save her sister's life because her sister is married to a king and man's evil, and she has to save her sister. And she's really like, I'm just so unequipped to do this because I don't know how to talk to people, and my sister hates me because at the age of 10 she was like, I hate you. So that grated me a little bit because this girl is so, she's like not an adult, you know, she can't talk to people. And at times, obviously like fantasy characters, they do need to have, you know, a flaw that they're working through. That was hers, that she like can't talk to people really. But if you get past that, the book is wonderful. It's really delightful. It's quite charming. There's a demon hiding in the body of a chicken. There's a really subtle, nice romance with this slightly older guy who's, you know, really rough and like strong. And I don't know, it's just really delightful. I don't know if I liked it a lot, but I had to get past that like one annoyance that I had with the narrator. Then after that, I read The Kingdom of Prep, which is the inside story of the rise and fall of J.Crew. This book, it's like 13 hours on audio, but it's very good. This lady did her research and I commend her. This was a fabulous read. The author is a former Vogue editor who's, you know, used to be obsessed with J.Crew, and is understandable because J.Crew was such a big titan of American mall brands, and basically she's looking at obviously the rise and the fall. So we're starting at the foundation of J.Crew, which was kind of shrouded in a lot of secrecy because you don't know this, like without doing a lot of digging. Now it's probably more common knowledge, but the founder of J.Crew was a man named Arthur Sinclair who came up around the same time as Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren. Now this is really quite interesting because all 3 of these characters were, you know, actually born in the Bronx. They're from Jewish families, and all 3 of them have played such a prominent role in American fashion. It's quite fascinating little detail. But Arthur Sinclair went to Yale, dropped out, is very, very, very wealthy, and decides to start a business. The business, one of them, he's like a business tycoon. One of the business that he starts is J.Crew, and this kind of becomes a passion project. This man is very intense. He was involved in creating this very like preppy identity for J.Crew, though they didn't really think it was preppy. So it is interesting. Another thing that this novel does is really look at America's relationship to prep and what does that mean and what exactly is prep. So anyways, Arthur Sinclair makes J.Crew. He takes, you know, crew as in like J.Crew, the sport, and then adds the J because the J looks very elegant. And then, you know, as J.Crew becomes at first a catalog company, he's very, very involved in the copy, which is also quite interesting because good copy makes such a huge difference in a brand. And so he is so fanatical about the copy. He's editing everything. He has a final say. And like, this is the CEO of the company, and he's like basically writing the whole entire catalog. He made, you know, 50 people find the perfect color for a green sweater. And I don't remember exactly what they settled on, but like this was a huge ordeal for the company. But then they found it and it was perfect. And the copy that was used is very like kind of out there. It's very weird, but interesting and compelling. And it does create this idea of J.Crew. And then Arthur brings on board his eldest daughter. Her name was Emily. And Emily and Arthur are also very intense. And Emily is kind of she is the ideal J.Crew customer. And both Arthur and Emily are very intense people. They're not exactly friendly. They're very like to themselves and private and proper, and they both like didn't like loud noises. So if you were working at the company, like if you had a meeting with them, you would take off the bracelets you were wearing because you didn't want the jangling to distract them. Like these were very intense people. And on one hand, you could look at it and be like, these guys were crazy. But then you're also just like, you have to be so exacting and so intense in order to not even just be a CEO, but to be like a founder or an artist or a creative. Like you need a crystal clear vision. And once you bring on other people, that vision can get diluted because those people either don't care as much, or they're not in the sauce. They're not lost in the sauce. And so it's just very fascinating because then as we see, once Emily decides that she wants to take over J.Crew, and the way that she has to do that, she has to buy out her father. She brings money from venture capitalists, and that kind of, you know, starts the beginning of the end, I guess you could say, but not really, because then Jenna Lyons and Mickey Drexler come on board and they really like bring the J.Crew that we now know into the forefront. But Emily has to buy out her father and the other investors, and she does that by getting the VC funding. But then within like 2-3 years, those same VC guys, they kick her out. And then Jenna and Mickey Drexler come into the picture, and they also have their own idea of J.Crew and are able to usher in this new period. And I just think you learned so much. Like, I'm really going on and on about this book, but it was so well researched, so full of fascinating details. You really like get into the workings of this business. And I'm harping on this because after that, I then read Glossy, which is Ambition, Beauty, and the Inside Story of Emily Weiss's Glossier. This is written by Marisa Meltzer. And this book is about half the length of The Kingdom of Prep, and I thought it was like an interesting read. However, it's probably not what you think it is. If you go into it really expecting lots of tea on Glossier, the company, and, you know, Emily Weiss, you're really not going to get it. It's kind of, she keeps them at a distance, and she hints, the author is like hinting all throughout that there's like this big Glossier reckoning and like there's going to be some blow up. There never is a blow up. It's all very chill actually, and in that regards it doesn't fulfill on the promises that the author hints at. But what it does do a good job of exploring in the beginning is, you know, Emily Weiss's character. She's quite an interesting individual. If you'd ever seen The City, you know she's a super intern, and the author interviews people who used to work with her when she was like a magazine girl, and she's always been ambitious and very self-possessed, and also at the same time a little weird. You kind of are a little weird if you're like that. But then you see how the author describes how when Emily Weiss first got married and she wrote that post on Into the Gloss about all of the wedding prep she did. Personally, I remember reading this. I've like reread it 2 or 3 times. I think it's a great post. It's so good. Emily Weiss goes into like intense detail, or not even that intense. It could have been more. She goes into detail about all the procedures and like beauty practices she did before getting married. And she kind of ends the piece by being like, all in all, I felt like an 8 out of 10 on the beauty scale for my wedding. And like a lot of people like went off and were really mean about it, but like who cares? I don't know. But because of that reason, Emily Weiss then goes super private and shares less of her personal life. And what's the second thing that's interesting about this novel is this nonfiction piece of work, is how Emily Weiss is one of the characters in a certain time of like American culture where girl bossery was really big. Her, Sophia Amoruso, the Audrey Gelman of The Wing, like these women were the titans of business. And all the attention that Emily Weiss is getting, you know, because once Glossier starts popping off, they do get lots of interest. They become kind of a bit of a unicorn. The valuation of the company gets quite high. But all of this talk really does throw Emily Weiss off of her center of gravity, I guess you could say, because once people start telling her, you know, she's a tech company, she loses the identity of Glossier and things kind of get muddled. And once things get muddled, as we also see with J.Crew, once that vision gets diluted, that is when businesses tend to fall into problems. You need to have such a strong, clear idea of what your business is and who the ideal customer is and what you guys stand for. And once you lose that, in the case of Glossier, once you start thinking you're a tech company when you're not a tech company, and you start, you know, talking as a tech entrepreneur and really using the language of Silicon Valley to talk about your beauty empire, things go off. So that's what that story does. Those were those two books about business that I read because I'm getting an MBA. Anyways, those books made me feel like I was. Those were really good. I think that the J.Crew one is fabulous. It's wonderful. It's a great case study. And though the Glossier book is an interesting case study, it's just left me wanting more. But I think you could also say it's still a little too early to really go that deep into the exact workings of the company. Then after that, I read my next McNally book. This is Exwife by Ursula Parrott. This book, wow. Let me take a sip of water. Okay. Ursula Parrott is an author of the 1920s who, this book, Exwife, was her debut novel, and she had quite a really good career, but she's basically forgotten in history now, though there's a lot of, there are many efforts to bring her back into like the public consciousness by the publication of this book. There's a new nonfiction book that came out, which I have a hold on Libby for, which I will be reading soon. Anyways, Ursula Parrott wrote this book. She wrote about 13, 14 other, actually maybe more than that. She wrote more books. She wrote a lot of books. And she also was a copywriter, and she wrote screenplays in Hollywood. Like, this woman had a career and she was making bank. She was making so much money. But by the end of her life, she wasn't really a good saver and she was very generous. So she dies in destitution and also has a lot of legal troubles. Anyways, this book is kind of thinly veiled. It draws a lot from her first marriage and the divorce that happens, and it's her looking at the identity of the ex-wife. So she really built that idea of an ex-wife and brought it into the public consciousness. And there's lots of conversations that she's having with men and her female friends about what does it mean to be an ex-wife, because we had the Victorian age where the family was there and marriage was sacred and protected only in the regards that divorce was not possible. Now divorce is possible and women have the right to vote. Where does that leave women? Because now men are like, well, you can earn money, you can live on yourself, there's no need for me to protect you in any capacity. And so she's really looking at that loss and being like, the culture is not ready for this. And while reading the book, I actually felt that the book is very applicable to conversations that we have in this day and age in 2023 about marriage and the realities of it, and what does that mean for the institution of marriage if men and women can both be working, if it is so easy to divorce. And the language is crisp, clean, clear, just really fun. And though you could say like it's very jazz age in the sense that she's drinking gin fizz and they're going to speakeasies and they're driving about in taxis all around New York, but just the bones of the book, which is this, what does it mean to be an ex-wife, to be working, to be on your own, to be dealing with heartbreak in the city while also trying to date or, you know, trying to find your next marriage and love, because the narrator does want love. Like, what does that mean? Like, those things are still so conversations that we're still having. So I would definitely recommend Ex-Wife. I also wrote about it in my newsletter. So if you really want to know what I'm reading kind of more in the moment, read my newsletter, link in bio to sub. Then I read sort of a memoir, not really a memoir. It's called Arrangements in Blue, Notes on Love and Making a Life by Amy Key. So Amy Key is a poet who is writing about Joni Mitchell, the album Blue, and this book was written after, like, while she's in the process of grieving the loss of her friend Roddy Lumsden, who was also a poet. So the author is a woman in her 40s, and she's really looking at how this album kind of shaped her perception and thoughts about love. And the author looks at the various relationships she's been in and the lack of romantic love that she's experienced, and she's kind of looking at the home. So, you know, her childhood home, and then once she gets an apartment, and before she had her own apartment, she was living with roommates, so she's looking at that. Then she's looking at what does it mean to travel on your own, and the layout of the book is wasn't exactly my favorite, but I do think there's some moments of interesting insight. In some regards, the book is marketed as a bit of a manual for how to build a life on your own terms, but I just think it should really be read as like a memoir. That's what it is. After that, I've read something that's a little bit similar in tone. I think there was definitely like a theme to the month's reading, but the book that I read was A Life of One's Own, 9 Women Writers Begin Again. This book was written by Joanna Biggs, and it's also a mix of like memoir and collective group biography, where the author is a woman who has recently been divorced, and she's kind of building a life on her own and trying to grapple with what kind of relationship she wants, what kind of lifestyle, and, you know, who does she want to be as a divorced woman who is also a writer. And so she's looking at characters such as George Eliot, Virginia Woolf, Sylvia Plath, Toni Morrison, Elena Ferrante. She's looking at their lives and how their personal life and their fiction, what lessons she can glean from that and apply that to her own life. And it's interesting. I think it's in line with some of the reading that I was doing. You know, there's conversations that I was having with the Amy Key memoir, as well as The Baby on the Fire Escape. So just lots of ideas are percolating about womanhood, marriage, a life of your own. Yeah. Next, after that, I switched gears completely, and I don't know how or why. Actually, I do. I was looking for nonfiction books on Libby, and I needed them to be available now because I've been doing a lot of driving. And so the book that I found was By Any Other Name, A Cultural History of the Rose. So this author, the author of this book is Simon Morley, and he's, I believe, like a professor of art history who has a house in South Korea, but very, very close to the North Korean border, and also a home in France, and maybe in London as well. And so he's looking at the rose, and I wouldn't expect this to be a book that was of interest to me, but it really was, because you're looking at the cultural identity of the rose in the world, the rose in art, media. For that reason, it's really interesting. There are moments when the book would talk about, you know, like the rose as a, you know, like not biology, but you know what I mean, like how we got from the roses of, you know, Shakespeare's time to now, the differences between the Chinese, Asian roses versus European roses, how the rose then came to America, most likely brought over by the Chinese. And so like when it would get like into that kind of stuff, it didn't necessarily hold my interest. But when you're doing like cultural analysis of the rose as a symbol of like beauty and love, and how at different times in Christian cultures, Christian religions, like the rose would be seen as a symbol of like lust and desire, and how at other times it was seen as an image of like purity. Like I liked those moments. It was really interesting. Wrapping this up after that, because, well, today, what day is today? Today's November 10th. Mirror Tag, Christopher Paolini's book In the World of Eragon came out. I read it. I got it. I might do a video on that. I might not, because I know most of you guys don't have an opinion on that. So that's why I saved this discussion of the next 3 books, 4 actually, to the very, very end. In anticipation of Mirror Tag, I decided to reread the Eragon series. So I read Eragon, Brisingr, and Eldest all in October, and then in the very, very first days of November, I read Inheritance. So I'm just gonna, I don't know, should I really even be chatting about them? So Eragon came out when the author was 16. It does pull a lot from, you know, Lord of the Rings and expected, like what we know, fantasy lore. but I read them as a child and I did enjoy them, so I reread them because this 5th book came out and I waited 10 years, maybe more, I don't know, for this book to come out, and I just wanted to have a good footing. Now, having read Murtagh, I don't really think I needed to reread the books. Whatever. You live and you learn. That's that. I hope you guys had a really great October reading month. The energy was a little chaotic in this video, but it's okay. I wanted to make a video, so I did that, and I hope you had a fabulous, wonderful, brilliant, perfect, lovely, delightful October, and I hope November is even more better, wonderful, awesome, great, any word you can think of, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.